Hello again. Tonight we are going to talk about a very beautiful but very dangerous illusion. It is a trap that catches millions of brilliant, hard-working language learners every single year. We call it the perfect English trap. To understand how this trap works, let me tell you a story about a man named David. David was an architect. In his professional life, he was a master of rules, measurements, and perfect lines. If a physical building was off by just 1 millimeter, it could collapse. So, when David decided to learn English to expand his business, he approached the language in the exact same way he approached his blueprints. He believed that language was a strict mathematical formula. For 2 years, David studied in isolation. He bought the thickest grammar books he could find. He memorized the precise biological mechanics of an American accent. He spent hours writing out the differences between the present perfect continuous and the past perfect simple. If he took an online English test, he consistently scored 100%. In the quiet safety of his study room, his English was an absolute masterpiece. He had built a beautiful, shining, perfect cage, and he was about to lock himself inside it. The true test came when David traveled to London for an international architecture conference. He stepped into a crowded, noisy hall filled with professionals from all over the world. The air was loud with a dozen different accents, fast laughter, and people interrupting each other with excitement. Language here was not a strict blueprint. It was a wild, rushing river. David stood near the coffee station, holding a warm cup, when a friendly designer from Brazil approached him. The man had a big smile and a very thick accent. "Hello, my friend," the Brazilian designer said, extending his hand. "This conference is very crazy, yes? What is your favorite part so far?" It was a simple question. The answer in David's native language was immediately clear. "I really enjoyed the morning presentation on sustainable materials." But as David opened his mouth to speak, the perfect English trap snapped shut. His brain went into a state of absolute panic. "Wait," his mind whispered. "Should I use the present perfect because the conference is still happening? Or the simple past because the presentation is over? Is the T in sustainable supposed to be a hard sound or a soft flap? Toot. If I mispronounce materials, will he think I am uneducated?" While David's brain was frantically trying to construct the mathematically perfect sentence, time did not stop. 3 seconds passed, then 5 seconds, then 8 seconds. The friendly smile on the Brazilian designer's face slowly faded into a look of confusion and then discomfort. He thought David was ignoring him or didn't want to talk. Sorry to bother you," the designer muttered quickly, turning away and disappearing into the loud crowd. David stood completely alone by the coffee table. He had a vocabulary of 10,000 words in his head, but he hadn't spoken a single one. He realized, with a heavy, sinking feeling in his chest, that perfect grammar is completely useless if it makes you too terrified to speak. He had traded human connection for grammatical perfection, and he had lost the very thing language was invented for. The rest of the morning was a dark cloud for David. He sat in the back row of the conference hall, listening to brilliant speeches, but his mind was stuck on that single failed moment by the coffee station. He had studied for thousands of hours, yet he was completely silent in the real world. He felt like a man dying of thirst while sitting next to a fountain, simply because he was too afraid to hold the cup incorrectly. During the lunch break, David sat alone at a large, round table in the dining hall. Soon, other architects began to sit down. Among them was a vibrant woman named Elena, an urban planner from Italy. Elena was a storm of warm energy. The moment she sat down, she began talking to everyone at the table. David listened to her English, and his analytical, perfectionist brain immediately began to catch her errors. She frequently forgot the S on third-person verbs. She mixed up in and on. Her Italian accent was so thick and musical that the rhythm of her sentences bounced like a lively song rather than strict, flat English. If language were a math test, David's brain told him that Elena was failing. But then, David stopped listening to the grammar and started looking at the faces of the native English speakers around the table. They were not judging her. They were not secretly laughing at her missing prepositions or her thick accent. Instead, they were leaning forward. They were smiling brightly. They were completely captivated by her passionate story about designing a public garden in Rome. At one point, Elena couldn't find the exact English word for waterfall. She didn't freeze in a cold panic like David had. She didn't apologize or shut down. She simply laughed, waved her hands in the air, and said, "You know, the big water that crashes down the mountain." The whole table smiled with her, and a British architect quickly offered, "A waterfall." Yes, I know exactly what you mean. The conversation flowed perfectly smoothly, without a single moment of awkwardness. In that exact moment, the heavy iron bars of David's perfect golden cage began to crack. He finally saw the fundamental mistake he had been making for 2 years. David viewed speaking English as a performance. He believed he was an actor on a stage, and everyone else in the room was a strict judge holding a scorecard waiting to deduct points for every dropped syllable or incorrect tense. But Elena viewed English as a connection. To her, language was not a rigid building. It was just a messy, beautiful bridge used to carry an idea from one human mind to another. It didn't matter if the bridge was missing a few nails or if the wood was painted the wrong color. The only thing that mattered was getting the cargo across the river. David looked down at his hands, feeling the weight of his own silent perfectionism. He was exhausted from performing for an invisible judge. He took a deep breath, looked up at the table, and prepared to do something that absolutely terrified him. He was going to open his mouth and let himself be messy. David's heart was hammering against his ribs. The conversation at the table was flowing smoothly, moving from public gardens to city infrastructure. Elena was passionately explaining how difficult it was to integrate nature into hard concrete spaces. David had the perfect example to share. In his home city, his architectural firm had recently transformed an abandoned, rusted railway into a vibrant public park. He knew the design. He knew the history. But as he prepared to speak, the familiar, paralyzing fear rushed into his throat. "What if I use the wrong preposition?" his mind whispered. "What if my accent makes the word infrastructure sound strange?" He looked across the table at Elena. She was smiling, completely unbothered by her own grammatical imperfections, entirely focused on the joy of sharing her ideas. David took a sharp, deep breath, intentionally overriding the perfectionist alarm bells ringing in his brain. "In my city," David started. His voice was a little shaky at first, but it was loud enough to be heard over the background noise. The architects at the table turned to look at him. We have builded a new park on an old train line." The moment the word "builded" left his lips, David's internal judge screamed, "Built! The past participle of build is built. You just made a beginner's mistake." For a fraction of a second, the old David wanted to stop. He wanted to look down at his shoes, let his face turn red, and whisper his usual apology. "I am so sorry. My English is bad. I mean built." He wanted to retreat immediately back into his safe, silent golden cage, but he forced himself to stay in the messy reality. He waved his hands slightly in the air, mimicking Elena's earlier relaxed gesture, and pushed right through the error. "We put the trees right on top of the old steel," David continued, his confidence growing slightly with each word. "It changed the whole feeling of the neighborhood. The people, they walk there now instead of driving cars." He finished his thought and braced himself for the reaction. He waited for the polite, confused smiles. He waited for the judgment. Instead, an American architect sitting across the table leaned forward, his eyes bright with genuine professional interest. "That is brilliant," the American said, nodding his head. "We are trying to do something very similar in Chicago right now. Did your team have trouble with the weight limits on the old steel bridges when you added the soil?" David exhaled. It was a long, slow breath that carried away 2 entire years of heavy, suffocating anxiety. The American architect did not care about the word "builded." He did not care about the slightly awkward phrasing or the missing vocabulary. He cared about the idea. He cared about the cargo, not the paint on the bridge. For the next 20 minutes, David stayed in the conversation. He dropped syllables. He mixed up his past and present tenses. He had a thick, undeniable accent. It was the messiest, most grammatically incorrect English he had spoken in years. It was also the most beautiful. Because for the very first time in his life, he was not just passing a silent grammar test in his head. He was truly communicating. When the lunch hour finally ended and the architects began to return to the conference hall, David walked out feeling completely different. The heavy invisible armor of perfection he had worn for 2 years was gone. He felt light, he felt human. As he walked down the carpeted hallway, he thought about the invisible judge he had feared for so long. He realized that the judge with the strict red pen did not exist in the real world. The native speakers did not care about his grammar. They only cared about his ideas. The only cruel, unforgiving judge in the room had been his own mind. Later that afternoon, David was wandering through the main exhibition hall, looking at the different booths displaying new architectural software. Near a booth displaying 3D modeling tools, he saw a familiar face. It was the friendly Brazilian designer from that morning the man David had accidentally ignored when his perfectionist panic had locked his jaw. The Brazilian man, whose name badge read Carlos, looked frustrated. He was trying to explain a specific design concept to a British software vendor, but he was missing the exact vocabulary. "It is like when the building breathes," Carlos said, waving his hands in the air to show the movement of wind. "The air goes in and out naturally. We do not use the big electric machines to cool the rooms. The shape of the roof does it." The British vendor looked polite but confused. "You mean air conditioning?" he asked. Carlos shook his head, his face turning slightly red. No, not conditioning, natural." Breathing. The old David would have walked quickly past the booth. He would have been terrified to interfere. He would have worried that his own English was not advanced enough to translate complex engineering terms, or that he might mispronounce a technical word and embarrass himself. But the new David did not freeze. He didn't consult his mental grammar textbook. He didn't construct the perfect sentence before speaking. He just stepped forward to build a messy bridge. "Excuse me," David said, stepping next to Carlos with a warm, genuine smile. He looked at the British vendor. "He means passive ventilation, using the wind and the geometry of the roof to cool the space without electricity." The vendor's face instantly lit up with understanding. "Ah, passive ventilation. Yes, absolutely. Our new software has an entire module dedicated to simulating that." Carlos let out a massive sigh of relief. He looked at David, his eyes bright with gratitude. "Yes, passive ventilation. Thank you, my friend," he laughed, happily clapping a heavy hand on David's shoulder. "My English brain was completely empty for a minute." David smiled back, feeling a deep, profound warmth spreading through his chest. "Mine too, sometimes," David replied honestly. "It happens to all of us." In that small, simple moment, David's transformation was complete. His imperfect, accented English had not just served himself, it had built a bridge for someone else. He had finally escaped the golden cage. We have reached the end of David's journey. We watched him build a beautiful golden cage of perfect grammar, only to realize that he had locked himself inside. We saw him freeze in panic at the coffee station, terrified of a single mistake. But most importantly, we saw him break free. We watched him realize that language is not a strict, mathematical performance. It is simply a messy, beautiful bridge used to connect one human mind to another. Now it is time to look at your own journey. Many of you watching this video are sitting in the exact same golden cage. You have studied for years. You know the rules. You can read complex books and write flawless emails. But when a native speaker says hello to you in person, your throat tightens. You immediately imagine an invisible judge standing in the room, holding a red pen, waiting to score your sentence out of 10. But here is the most important truth you will learn today. The invisible judge does not exist. Native speakers do not care about your dropped syllables. They do not care if you use the present perfect instead of the simple past. They are not grading you. They are just standing on the other side of the river, waiting for your cargo. They are waiting for your ideas, your jokes, your stories, and your unique perspective. When you refuse to speak because you are afraid of a mistake, you are not being polite or smart. You are simply keeping your cargo all to yourself. How to escape the trap? To break out of the perfectionist trap, you must completely change the way you measure success. Here are 3 steps to start building messy, beautiful bridges today. Fire the judge. The next time you speak and your brain screams, you just used the wrong tense, simply ignore it. Do not stop. Do not lower your eyes, and definitely do not apologize for your English. Keep the words flowing. Acknowledge that the internal judge is just your ego trying to protect you from embarrassment, and then fire it from its job. Focus on the cargo, not the paint. Stop asking yourself, was my sentence grammatically perfect? Instead, ask yourself, did the other person understand my idea? If they smiled, nodded, or answered your question, you succeeded. The bridge worked. The cargo arrived safely. Celebrate the clunky moments. Give yourself permission to be messy. When you forget a word and have to wave your hands in the air to explain it, just like Elena did with the waterfall, laugh at the situation. The messiness is actually where real, charming human connection happens. A final word, perfect English, is a trap. It keeps your voice silent, your ideas hidden, and your world small. The world does not need your perfect grammar. The world needs your brave, imperfect, authentic voice. Thank you so much for walking this path with me today. If David's story helped you see your own English journey in a new light, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue making these stories for learners everywhere. Before you go, I want you to make a promise to yourself. Write a comment below. What is one grammar mistake you are going to stop worrying about today? I read every single comment and I love seeing your courage grow. Good night, and keep building your beautiful, messy bridges. Sometimes when we learn a new lesson, it is helpful to look back at the journey one more time. Let us review David's story slowly, paying attention to the words and the meaning behind them. David was an architect. In his job, everything had to be perfect. When he started learning English, he treated the language like a math problem. For 2 years, he stayed in his quiet room. He read heavy books, he memorized grammar rules, and he practiced a perfect American accent. In his own mind, his English was flawless. He had built a beautiful, golden cage of perfection. But when he went to a loud, busy conference in London, his perfect cage became a trap. When a friendly man from Brazil tried to talk to him, David froze. His brain worked too hard to find the exact, perfect grammar. Because he was so afraid of making a mistake, he stayed completely silent. The friendly man walked away, thinking David did not want to speak. David felt a heavy sadness. He realized that a perfect vocabulary is useless if you are too afraid to use it. During lunch, David watched a woman named Elena. She was from Italy. Her English was not perfect. She used the wrong tenses and forgot her prepositions. But she did not care. She was smiling, laughing, and sharing her ideas. Everyone at the table loved listening to her. David saw that Elena used English as a connection, while he was treating it as a performance. She was building a messy bridge to reach other people, while he was hiding behind a wall of rules. David decided to be brave. He joined the conversation. He tried to say the word built, but instead, he made a beginner's mistake and said, builded. His internal judge screamed at him, telling him to feel embarrassed. But David ignored the judge. He kept talking. To his surprise, no one laughed. An American architect understood his idea perfectly and continued the conversation. Later that day, David used his messy, imperfect English to help the Brazilian man translate a difficult architectural word. He did not worry about his accent. He just built a bridge. David left the conference feeling light and happy. The ghost of the invisible judge was gone. He finally understood the secret of language. The world does not want your perfect grammar. The world simply wants your ideas, your stories, and your true voice. I have always believed that language is like music. When I travel to international design conferences, I do not worry about playing every note perfectly. To me, English is a loud, joyful street festival. You step on some toes, you use the wrong rhythm, but as long as you keep moving, you are connecting. But not everyone dances to the same music. I remember seeing David by the coffee station on the very first morning in London. He stood incredibly straight, holding his cup like it was a fragile piece of glass. He looked like one of his own buildings, strict, perfectly measured, and completely closed off. I am Brazilian, and in my culture, a stranger is just a friend you haven't spoken to yet. I walked up to him with a big smile. I asked him a simple question about the conference, expecting him to laugh or share a quick story. Instead, he froze. I watched the color drain from his face. His eyes went wide with a quiet panic. He stared at me for 3, 5, maybe 8 heavy seconds. He did not blink. He did not breathe. His jaw was locked tight. In my heart, I felt a quick sting of embarrassment. Ah, I thought, he is a very serious, very important architect. My thick accent and my simple words have offended him. He does not want to waste his time talking to a messy designer like me. I quickly apologized and walked away, feeling like a fool for trying to build a bridge where there was only a solid concrete wall. I did not see David again until that afternoon in the main exhibition hall. I was at a software booth, locked in a very frustrating conversation with a British vendor. I had a beautiful, complex design in my head, a building that cooled itself using the natural wind without electric air conditioning. But the English vocabulary had completely vanished from my brain. I was waving my hands, talking about breathing roofs and big wind, sounding like a child trying to explain quantum physics. The vendor was staring at me with polite confusion. I was drowning. Suddenly, a voice spoke up next to me. "He means passive ventilation." I turned my head in shock. It was David, the cold architect from the coffee station. He was not standing rigidly anymore. His shoulders were relaxed, and as he spoke to the vendor explaining my idea, I noticed something incredible. His English was not the perfect robotic language I expected. He paused. He dropped a syllable. He had a strong, undeniable accent. It was a little bit clunky, a little bit messy, but it was exactly what I needed. He had thrown me a rope. When the vendor finally understood and smiled, the relief washed over me like a warm wave. I turned to David and clapped my hand on his shoulder, thanking him for saving me. When I saw him smile back, a real, genuine, warm smile, the truth hit me like a flash of lightning. David was never cold. He was never arrogant. He had simply been terrified. That morning by the coffee station, he wasn't judging my English. He had been trapped inside his own head, paralyzed by the fear of his own mistakes. But here, in the afternoon, he had decided to drop his armor. He had chosen to be messy just to help me. I realized then that the bravest thing a person can do is not to speak perfectly. The bravest thing is to speak imperfectly, with an open heart, just to make sure another human being feels understood. People often tell me that I have a lot of confidence when I speak English. They hear my loud Italian accent. They see my hands moving in the air, and they assume I must not care about the rules. But the truth is, I know exactly how many mistakes I make. I hear them every time I open my mouth. I just choose to sing the song anyway. When I sat down at the lunch table that day in London, I immediately noticed the man sitting across from me. His name tag said David. He was a handsome man, but he looked like he was holding his breath. His posture was perfectly straight. His hands were folded tightly on the table, and his eyes were constantly moving, analyzing everything. When I started talking about my public garden project in Rome, I could feel David watching me. I knew exactly what his brain was doing. I saw the tiny flickers in his eyes every time I forgot an S on a verb, or every time I used the wrong preposition. He was grading me. But I was not angry with him. I felt a deep sympathy for him, because 10 years ago, I was exactly like David. When I first started traveling for work, I was terrified of sounding stupid. I would sit in important meetings in Paris or Berlin, completely silent, translating every single word in my head 3 times before I dared to speak. And because I waited so long to be perfect, the conversation always moved on without me. My beautiful ideas stayed locked in my head, and my projects suffered. One day, an older mentor pulled me aside and told me, "Elena, you are a brilliant designer, but if you do not invite us into your mind, we cannot build anything with you. Your silence is more destructive than a million broken grammar rules." That was the day I stopped trying to speak perfect English and started trying to speak human English. So, as I sat at the table in London, I kept talking. I wanted to show David that the water was safe. I purposely laughed when I couldn't remember the word for waterfall. I wanted him to see that the native speakers were not judging me. They were just eager to help me build the bridge. Then, something beautiful happened. I saw David take a sharp, deep breath. I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped the edge of the table. He was going to jump. When he told us about his railway park, his voice was shaking, and when he loudly and clearly said the word builded, I saw the pure terror flash across his face. He knew he had made a mistake. For a second, I thought he was going to apologize and hide again. I held my breath, silently cheering for him. Keep going, I thought. Do not look down. Look at us. He waved his hand, pushed past the fear, and finished his story. When the American architect leaned in, genuinely fascinated by David's idea, I watched the heavy armor fall right off David's shoulders. He exhaled, and for the first time all day, he smiled. It was a relaxed, authentic smile. I took a sip of my water to hide my own massive grin. David thought he was just talking about a park built on an old railway. But I knew the truth. He had just laid the very first brick of his own bridge, and he was finally free. I only speak one language. I was born in Chicago, raised in America, and I have never had the time or the talent to learn a second language. Whenever I travel to international conferences like the one in London, I am constantly amazed and honestly a little bit intimidated by the fact that almost everyone around me is speaking in their second, third, or even fourth language. But I know a secret that most English learners do not realize. Native speakers are almost never judging you. In fact, we are usually just incredibly grateful that you went through the exhausting effort of learning our language so that we don't have to learn yours. At the lunch table that afternoon, my mind was not on grammar. My mind was stuck on a massive problem. My architectural firm was trying to convert an old, elevated railway in Chicago into a public park. We were completely stuck on the engineering. The old steel bridges were not strong enough to hold the immense weight of the soil, the trees, and the concrete walking paths. I was stressed, tired, and desperately looking for a solution. I was half listening to the conversations at the table when a quiet man named David finally spoke up. I had noticed David earlier. He seemed very stiff, like a man wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too small. When he started talking about his own city's railway park, I could physically see the intense, fearful effort in his eyes. We have builded a new park on an old train line, he said. Did I notice the word builded? Yes, of course. My brain instantly recognized that it was not standard English. But did I care? Not even for a fraction of a second. My brain simply auto-corrected the word to built and moved straight to the meaning of his sentence. To me, David had not just made a grammar mistake. He had just handed me the exact key I needed to unlock my project in Chicago. I leaned forward across the table, completely electrified. I asked him how his team handled the weight limits on the steel. For the next 20 minutes, David explained his firm's brilliant engineering solutions. His English was messy. He searched for words, he used awkward phrasing, and his accent was thick. But I was hanging on to every single word he said. To me, he wasn't a student failing an English test. He was an absolute genius, and he was giving me a masterclass in urban design. If David had stayed silent that day because he was afraid of saying builded, I would have flown back to Chicago without a solution. His city's beautiful ideas would have stayed locked inside his head, completely useless to the rest of the world. I wish I could take a microphone and announce it to every language learner on earth. The strict, angry judge with the red pen does not exist. We do not care about the paint on your bridge. We are just standing on the other side of the river, desperately waiting for the cargo you are carrying. Please, do not let a textbook silence you. We need to hear what you have to say. We have now seen this story from every angle. We felt David's paralyzing fear of making a mistake. We saw Elena's brilliant, messy bravery. We understood Carlos's deep gratitude for a helping hand. And finally, we looked through the eyes of Thomas, the native speaker, and discovered the most liberating truth of all. The strict, angry judge with the red pen does not exist. But this story was never really about a group of architects in London. It is about you, right now. Many of you are sitting inside your own golden cages. You have spent years studying vocabulary, memorizing grammar rules, and taking online tests. You have built a beautiful, perfect understanding of English in your head. But when it is time to open your mouth and speak to a real human being, you freeze. You are so terrified of saying build it instead of built that you choose to say nothing at all. You are protecting your pride, but you are starving your soul of human connection. It is time to break the cage. The Bridge Builders Protocol. If you want to transition from a silent student into a fearless speaker, you must fundamentally change how you view the English language. Here are your 3 new rules. Rule 1. Fire the invisible judge. The next time you speak and your brain screams, you just used the wrong tense. Do not stop. Do not apologize. Acknowledge that the internal judge is just your ego trying to protect you from feeling embarrassed, and then fire it from its job. Native speakers are not grading your performance. They are waiting for your ideas. Rule 2. Focus on the cargo, not the paint. Language is just a messy bridge. Its only purpose is to carry a thought from your brain into someone else's brain. Stop asking yourself, was my sentence grammatically perfect? Instead, ask yourself, did the cargo arrive safely? If the other person understood you, smiled, or answered your question, you succeeded. The bridge worked. Rule 3. Give yourself permission to be clunky. Perfect English is sterile and cold. Real human connection happens in the messy moments. When you forget a word, wave your hands. Draw a picture in the air. Laugh at your own mistakes. Vulnerability is a magnet for connection. When you allow yourself to be imperfect, you make the people around you feel safe and comfortable. A final word. The world does not need another silent grammar expert. The world has complex problems to solve, beautiful stories to tell, and deep connections to make. There are people out there right now, people like Carlos and Thomas, who desperately need the exact ideas that are locked inside your head. Do not let a textbook silence you. Your ideas are too important and your voice is too valuable to be kept inside a cage. Thank you for listening. If this story helped you drop your armor and see your English journey in a new, freeing light, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to keep exploring the deep emotional side of language learning. Before you leave, I have one question for you. Write a comment below. Which character in this story did you relate to the most? Today, David, Elena, Carlos, or Thomas? I read every single comment, and I love seeing the world through your eyes. Good night, and go build your messy bridges.